Okay, so
Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. So we continue our journey with the book Way to the Quran. And today we're going to try to cover a lot of material so that we can close off this session. So we're not going to be able to cover everything in detail, but I'm going to highlight some of the most important sections that will carry us into Ramadan and give us a nice preparation for how to build and cultivate our relationship with the Quran. So in this section, this is chapter 5, is entitled Study and Understanding. One of the things that has to be understood is that the Quran, although we look at it and we are able to, pick it up and we're able to like read through its pages, it's not like any other text. It's not like any other text. That's something that we have to understand. The Quran is revelation. And so one of the issues that comes up is that we're studying the Quran as a book, but in reality, we have to have the understanding that this is Allah that is speaking to us. And we encounter Allah's speech as we're studying that book, right? And so that's an important point. So one of the things he says is that you cannot gather the full and real blessings and treasures of the Quran unless you devote yourself to understanding its meaning. That's the first part. So you have to comprehend what it is that the Quran is saying. And there's no doubt that we mentioned this before. Without the Arabic language, there's that barrier that's there, but the translation of the meaning still give us an understanding of the general message. And when we start to study the Quran with more depths, we're able to get at some of the detailed points. And that study, one is undertaken in our own languages outside of the Arabic. If it's done appropriately, it will give us that understanding that needs to be there in order to have a sound foundation in Islam. And the second part is that unless what your creator is saying to you, it becomes difficult to have that relationship. So he, is talking about the twofold ideas of having comprehension of the Quran and having a relationship with the Quran. But behind that is believing that the Quran, is coming from Allah, is Allah's speech. So that's one thing that he's emphasized from the beginning. And I said that's one of the beautiful things about this book is that he's encouraging us to encounter Allah in our reading with the Quran by having that clear understanding that it's Allah that's speaking to us. So for instance, right now I'm speaking to you, you're paying attention to what I'm saying. And so in that process, you're getting an understanding of what's being said. And so for instance, if I were to shut off the video, you would just hear my voice, and that you would just be hearing the message that's being communicated to you. So what the video does is it gives us this understanding that there's someone talking that's there. There's a human being that's talking. So we want to have a similar concept, except we're dealing with Allah. We're not imagining Allah. We're not giving Allah a form, but we have this idea that behind the words, there's someone. There's Allah that is speaking. That's important. Why? Because that is primarily what differentiates the Quran from any other book, right? That the Quran is revelation and is the revelation of God. So it may sit on the shelf with other books, but it's not like any other book because behind it, the one who is speaking is the creator, is the one that is the one who is speaking. So that's extremely important. And so I don't know why the highlight didn't come up so clearly. We've been having this technical problem that uh, the screen doesn't keep up because I can move my screen. But in any event, so we'll continue from here. He says, on the other hand, merely understanding the meaning may also not help you, right? May be of no avail. Many listened to the Quran from the lips of the Prophet ﷺ and understood every word of it. Then they went astray. Millions of people for whom Arabic is their language understand the Quran, but it doesn't make an impact on them. Scores of scholars, Muslims as well as non-Muslims, spend a lifetime studying and reading the Quran, but and their scholarship, is not to be faulted. And then, they're not touched by it. And so that's one of the things that he, is trying to aim at, that we are touched by the Quran as well as understanding it. And so we have to devote ourselves to understanding the Quran because it has come to us as a guide, a reminder, an admonition, and a healing. It's not just a source of blessings that we get because we recite each letter that's in it. It's not a ritual act, something that's done repetitiously. It's not something that is like the way that the Christians look at it, is just you just stand and oh my God. That's how people deal with the Quranic recitation. Sometimes it's between the oh my God and wow, that's a cool beat. And that's the unfortunate thing that we find when people are just looking at when we get in that mode where we're listening to the Quran from the angle almost like it's like music, and then we start comparing who recites better because of what we feel, and wow, that recitation was awesome, or whatever word that's being used. That's not really the realm that he wants us to be. He wants us to be in that zone where we have some connection to Allah Ta'ala, and we begin to see the Quran as a book that is central to our lives. He talks about moving to the point of personal study, right? And so he already said that we have to devote ourselves. He's saying that we have to absorb, become absorbed by the Quran and discover what it is that the Quran has to say, right? Because it's not just merely a book of knowledge, right? Some people, they make an argument against studying the Quran, and primarily it's because people can come up with their own understanding and their own meanings, and they can get lost, right? But that's not 100% of a good excuse to leave the personal study of the Quran. What's demanded is for us to be able to understand how to approach this task, right? And so that's why we're reading this book, because we're trying to get into the zone of how is it that I can approach the Quran. And so the way to the Quran is to have that personal relationship with the Quran and take the means. And the means here is that you have to understand that there's a proper way to study the Quran. So we can't just say that because people get lost in studying the Quran by themselves, there should be no encouragement to do it, right? That's not the case. Everyone has a responsibility to understand, and what we're trying to do here is give a pathway to understand, right? And so that's not a good enough of an excuse. So we have in the first case as a problem when it comes to studying the Quran that we're not disciplined, that we're not committed to it. And in the second case, as a problem when it comes to studying the Quran, people may feel as though that it's a danger to study the Quran without a teacher and so on and so forth. But ultimately, that's why we have these types of programs. It's not that teachers are not available out there. We have to search that stuff out. It's not that there's no programs, right, to understand the Quran. We're doing a whole program on just the basics of what kind of relationship shall we have to the Quran. After that, there's other levels of knowledge, right? And so it's not an excuse to say that, because people can misunderstand the Quran, that I shouldn't understand the Quran, or I shouldn't devote myself to understand the Quran. The first step is just building the relationship, and then comes the issue of understanding. And then we talk a little bit about, how it is that we should orient ourselves, or what are the rules that should be taken to understand the Quran. We have to emphasize that the Quran is a guidance for every person, is a teacher and a mentor. Understanding it is vital. That's true. You have to have some relationship with the Quran. You have to feel that Allah is speaking to you. And he mentioned that earlier on, that you have to feel that it's Allah speaking to you directly. Forget everyone else. Forget the angel Jibreel, forget the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, forget the Muslim community. You have to feel that the Quran is a message for you that's being communicated to you directly. And so we have to commit to it with our minds and our hearts, right? And that's the seed of understanding. They have hearts, but they understand not with them. They have eyes, but they see not with them. They have ears, but they hear not with them. They are like cattle. No, they are more astray, right? It is they who are heedless. And what that means is a translation of the ayah of the Quran. And that is found in Surah Al-Araf. What that means is that, the human being, when you're not on the right track, you humiliate yourself. And even you're below animals, right? That animal knows its station. It knows it knows what it needs to do, right? You think about the cow, it does its thing. It doesn't deviate from its path. And so, for instance, here, the indication is that the whole of our being should be devoted to this cause of understanding the Quran. Our hearts, our eyes, our ears, all of that should be in that process. That it should be it should be understood that these are the tools or the means to understanding. And so they can only be the tools and the means to understanding if we give the Quran our undivided attention, right? It's interesting how video games today can consume us to the point where someone can be screaming or yelling or talking to us and we're completely disassociated from it. What they're saying was going on in the environment. We're consumed by that. Same thing with our telephones when it comes to the issue of social media or otherwise, we're consumed by that. We're in that zone, we're in a flow with that. Nothing else exists. And that's what he wants from us. Khuram Murad, rahmatullahi alayhi, what he wants from us is to approach the Quran in that way where we're lost in it. Nothing else. When we're studying the Quran and we're developing that relationship with the Quran and we're spending time with it, nothing else exists except that. And after all, what we're talking about is we're talking about that nothing else exists in that moment except Allah speaking to us directly, individually. A lot of us, we complain about our relationship with Allah, but when Allah speaks, we're not listening. So imagine if you're talking to somebody on a regular basis and you find yourself in a situation where they're not listening to you. You don't feel that you don't feel heard. You don't feel heard. And so that's something that, there's a certain type of feeling that comes along with that. Of course, that's not the case with Allah wa ta'ala, but the point is that we have to put ourselves in that position of what does it mean to be in a relationship in which we're not being heard, whether with our parent or with our loved one or a friend, where that person is not listening to us. And so that's the type of behavior that we bring to Allah. We bring that behavior to Allah. We're in a relationship with Allah many times where we're not listening to Allah as Allah is speaking. So it becomes disrespectful, subhanahu wa ta'ala. We find the situation is one in which we want from Allah. We want Allah to accept our dua. And we have to talk to ourselves. I'm not talking at anyone. We have to talk to ourselves with this. We want from Allah. But what is it that we give back in that relationship? Let me try to restart the share. Okay, so now we got it back. So now he talks about that how the Quran, how the Quran is encouraging the Sunnah to take your time with it, not to finish it in less than 3 days, right? And so because the aim here is not necessarily for perfecting our recitation or anything like that, but the aim here is to, sometimes when you're trying to perfect the recitation, you may want to complete faster or whatever. That has something to do with the whole program of trying to achieve to be a hafiz and so on and so forth. But we're not talking about approaching the Quran from the angle of memorization in this case. We're talking about approaching the Quran from the angle of reflecting on its meanings and understanding it. We already went over a little bit of the issue of, the problem of personal study, right? And so I just want to say on that again is that you have to know your limits. You have to know your limits. When it comes to the Quran, you just can't invent your own understanding, but you have to have a relationship with the Quran. And so therefore, it's important to understand, the way that the scholars approach the Quran, and that's why we have something that's called tafsir literature. Tafsir is the clarification of the meanings of the Quran. And so that tafsir literature, what it does for us is it gives us a systematic approach to understanding the meanings of the Quran. And some tafsir are better than other tafsir when it comes to presenting information. That's like a scholarly understanding. Here, he warns us that there is a risk of trying to understand on our own. We can come to our own conclusions and we can be erroneous or wrong. But he's not just talking about understanding in a scholarly way. He's making sure that we have this profound relationship with the Quran, being clear that the Quran is Allah speaking to us. That's first, that's primary. Before going into a deeper meaning of the Quran or getting into the history of why this was this way or why it is that Allah said this and what is the meaning of this ayat, the first thing is to develop that relationship. So now, when we start talking about understanding, he gives us some tools. So he says that there's categories of understanding, two in specific: tadakkur and tadabbur. Tadakkur and tadabbur. And those words are very important, very important. So he talks about tadakkur. It has been, why don't I highlight this a little better? So he talks about tadakkur, and he says that it's used extensively in the Quran, right? And here he says that it means admonition, delivering advice, remembering, taking heed, taking heart, right? Therefore, it can signify the process whereby you try to grasp the general message and teachings being conveyed to you by the Quran. We want to leave it at that. That's a very simple way for you to leave with this an understanding of this concept of dhikr. That we're looking at the Quran as how it is that is talking to us. What is the message that is being conveyed? What is the message that is being conveyed? Tadabbur is another category, right? Is another category. And tadabbur signifies understanding, right? In a different way, right? It signifies that you try to find the full meaning of every word, ayah, surah, that you explore the fuller meaning behind the words, the metaphors, the parables, right? And so that's important. That's another level. And so those two things you have to keep in mind, tadakkur and tadabbur. There's a time when we go into the Quran and we allow the Quran to speak to us from the angle of tadakkur. And some, especially some of the smaller surah of the Quran or chapters of the Quran, we can study those and we can sit with those. Even Surah Al-Fatiha, right? Surah Al-Fatiha, like, I'll give you an understanding. Ihdina Sirat al-Mustaqim. So here we're seeing that we're asking Allah to guide us to the straight path. When you go, okay, for instance, when you approach that ayah of the Quran, Surah Al-Fatiha, maybe in Salah, whatever, you can tune in your heart to the angle of like, oh Allah, please guide me, right? Guide me, help me. And even if you're in a situation where you feel tested by shaitan, we know we say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, that we take refuge in Allah from shaitan, the accursed. But also, it becomes a means by which you have that connection with Allah. In your heart, you're like, please guide me, Allah, in this situation. You have that feeling. Now, that's kind of from the side of tadabbur, that you see that from the side of tadakkur, that is reminding us that we need Allah, that we need to be guided. Now, for instance, when you start getting into the tadabbur side and the more meaning side and more detail, then you realize, okay, the Quran here, in this instance, this is the way that the Muslims or the believers that follow the prophets, this is something that they were asking. Those who deviated from it, right? They were maghdubi alayhim. They were those who Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala's anger came upon them. And they were those described by the Quran as wal-dallin, those who went astray. And so, for instance, if you're going to do tadabbur of the Quran, here now, when you go to the deeper meanings, you realize that there was some hadith that explained this surah. And in the contents of the explanation, we find that there was a story behind this and these ayat. And the story behind these ayat or verses of the Quran is that the people of the book were divided into two groups. One group that had knowledge and they understood the meanings of the revelation that came to them, but they didn't practice it. Another group, they didn't have knowledge. They practiced without knowledge. And so the first group, some indication is there in the hadith text was some group from Bani Israel or from those who claim to be the followers of Musa, alayhi salatu wasalam. And in the second group is some group who claim to follow Isa, alayhi salatu wasalam. The two prophets, Musa and Isa, are indicated too. And so that is a more formal study. You see, that's more like about having facts and having context. And it can help us in tying in our relationship to Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala in our study of the Quran. Meaning that through the Quran we develop a relationship. It can help us the facts, but it's not the same thing as taking the feeling that Allah is speaking to you in the moment and guiding you to something, or is correcting you. You know what I'm saying? It's a different type of relationship. Let's go back a little bit. So the tadakkur has been translated as the Quran giving us admonition, or we derive advice from it. We remember Allah, or we remember the hereafter, or we remember our sins, or we remember the blessings. Taking heed that, and the record of the Quran, we may hear ayah and we hear that it's talking about a certain scenario or situation, and we take heed to what's being said, and it has an impact on us. We taking it to heart that, like I said, that ayah and in the moment we take it seriously, and we're able to recall it, and we bring it to heart, and it becomes a source of inspiration and guidance for us, right? And so we grasp the general meanings, but we're at a spiritual level with it, in the sense that we're connecting with it. And the tadabbur, the tadabbur is more about finding the more fuller meanings. Is more of an academic study, right? And that's important because it helps us and develop that relationship. So what should the aims to the Quran study be, right? That we understand tadakkur, and we, also understand tadabbur, right? The two approaches to the Quran. And tadakkur, remember, you essentially set out to nourish your heart, to increase your faith, to discover the message that the Quran is giving to you, to take it to heart, to remember it. And in all of that, you should be able to hear Allah's voice, what He wants you to do, what He wants you to be, and what you to do. There's levels and forms of understanding, right? That you comprehend this in the study of the Quran. There's levels and forms. First, that you understand the simple meaning, the literal meaning, right? The second is that you find out how the scholars have understood it, and the third is that you study and you ponder on your own, right? In light of having an understanding of what it is that the scholars have been said, and developing your own relationship with the Quran. A lot of times people, they begin to study the Quran and they create a problem for themselves because they make up meanings for the Quran. And that's why, we have to have the two sides. Yes, you reflect upon the Quran. Yes, you consider the Quran to be a guide for you, but you also have to understand how it is that we as Muslims, and how it is that Islamic scholarship is understanding. And let me be honest with you, it is a commitment. It's a commitment. And some research is better than others. That's something that has to be said. Just because it's said in a scholarly form doesn't always mean that it's better, is something that's good for our lives, right? Because that's why when we start getting to the issue of that you discover His meaning by obeying His messages and fulfilling the duties and mission that it entrusts to you, you have to have scholarship that you trust, that's sound, that is with you in that process of teaching you how to implement the Quran, right? And also guide you in the study. But as far as having a personal relationship with the Quran, that's something that everyone is obligated. We talked about the issue of reading the tafsir works. Is not any harm at all, and is extremely encouraged that people read the translation of the Quran, that they pick good translations of the Quran. Ahmed Zeki is one of the better translations in the English language of the Quran, right there. That's one of the best that's around. He was a scholar from Al-Azhar al-Sharif. He used to live in the Chicago area. I'm not sure if he's even still around, but he Uh, he translated the Quran and is one of the better ones. Using a tafsir book like Tafhim or Ibn Kathir, or even, the more contemporary works. There's contemporary works like by Mufti Taqi Uthmani. There's uh, other books like the first part of the Quran and the second part, which is Baqarah and Ali Imran, uh, by Amin Islahi. There is Qurtubi. There is Tafsir al-Sa'di, uh, which is translated. Those are all foundational. You know what I'm saying? Foundational clarifications on the meanings of the Quran. But then again, still you have to come back to the issue of what you have to come back to the issue of having that relationship. Here he mentions the issue of reading it over and over again, the surah of the Quran. Whatever part you have chosen to study, you will have to read it over and over again. That is foundation. That is a means by which we study the Quran. That's a means by which we study the Quran. That if the more you read it, the more you become familiar with it. And it seems like repetition, but it's not repetition. Because each time in your life, you will be at a different position in your life, different situations are going on, different reflections are going on. So the Quran refreshes itself, like Imam Saeed Nursi said. And so it will speak to you in different ways in different situations, right? And so our teacher, Dr. Daha Jabir, he even used to encourage, I'm not encouraging anybody to do this right now because I know for some people it would be exhausting. But he used to say, if you really want to commit to the Quran, as students of the Quran, that even reading a surah of the Quran or chapter of the Quran like 100 times, is the beginning of guidance. May Allah have mercy on him, he passed away. And so that's one of the things that he used to talk about, because he talked about that repetitious reading of a particular part of the Quran, chapter of the Quran I mentioned. What it does is it gives us an understanding of that world, so to speak, and we become familiar with it. And then we begin to understand its main themes and its sub themes, right? And so then when we are accompanying that with an actual study of tafsir, books that clarify the meaning of the Quran, it enriches our understanding and we become more proficient at what that means. The companions, they used to take their time and study, about 5 ayat at a time, and they understood its meanings. They learned how to recite it, and they learned how to practice it. They learned what it was that was being demanded of them by the Quran to practice. That's the ultimate end game. Is not just understanding, is not just having a relationship with the Quran, but is implementing the Quran with knowledge. As the Quranic words become engraved on your heart, as they are frequently on your lips, you will find it easier and more rewarding to contemplate and meditate upon it. So that goes all the way back to what was being said about the issue of developing a relationship with the Quran. If we're going to get to that point, there's some other points that I'm not going to go into too much. Anybody can read those, and they can send us questions on that. Just because of the issue of time, I do want to take a few more minutes. One of the things that he talks about is studying the words of the Quran and the background of the Quran, right? And so that's important. That kind of summarizes what came before, what he was talking about in the rest of the pages that I skipped through. But studying the words of the Quran, what does Iman mean, right? What does Allah mean, right? What does Salah mean? Words of the Quran. And then understanding the context. Like for instance, okay, what does the Salah mean in this ayat? Okay, what is the meaning of these 3 ayats together? What is the meaning of this surah as a whole together, right? And also studying the background. And the tafhim of Maulana Maududi, it does a lot of this stuff for you. And the Tadabbur al-Quran by Maulana Amin Islahi, a lot of it is focused on word study. And Ibn Kathir, it gives you a lot of the historical background because it's giving you a hadith and it's giving you statements of the companions. It's giving you a lot of the historical background that you need as well, right? But those 3 references, they help you a lot in that regard. And this is, what we were talking about before about translating the Quran to your situation, implementing it in your life. He says that, for your next task, you should be to your your next task should be to read and understand the text in your own context, meaning in your life situation. And that's a little more difficult to achieve, but that's necessary. You need guidance in that. There's no doubt about that. He says that in order to understand and absorb the Quran, you must come as close as you can to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, Zoom is freezing on us, so I'm going through the slides that I have, and there's not it's not mirroring, so I apologize for that. To understand and absorb the Quran, you must come as close as you can to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So that means studying the life of the Prophet, sending salawat, reading the ahadith. That's true. The more that you do that, the more that you understand how much the Quran is interconnected. Then there's the issue of group study. We're only going to go about to 335, and then we'll come to it. There's the issue of group study, and he talks about how to set up, a group study of the Quran. This book in itself should be studied multiple times. Even if you read it before, it should be read again, because what it will do, is it will encourage you. It will encourage you to come back to the Quran, and not only that, to organize your study of the Quran as an individual and in unison, or in the relationship with others that we will call a collective study circle. That you will build some sort of collective study circle. And so he talks about how to do that. So he talks about one, this is where a small group gathers together to study the Quran and reflect upon its meanings. Or it could be where a group, small or large, gathers to study the Quran and actively listen to the explanation of someone that is more knowledgeable. That's called a dars, or a lesson, or a lecture. So one is just, people coming together, and he calls that a halaqah, or a study circle. And one, the dars is where someone is coming to teach. And so with that, for instance, study circle, he talks about preparing, that one, that you should always prepare presentations for it, and that you should have the right intention. You should have the right intention. And so in order to prepare for it, you would have to read a book like this, and then also have another book like the Tafhim, which is helping you to study. And he outlines, how to do it in the study circle, what it is that needs to be done in the study circle. Lastly, he talks about the whole issue of a curriculum that can be read over, a year's period of time, right? He also talks about what ayat of the Quran or surah can be read in the different salawat. That's towards the end. And he talks about things like reciting ayat al-Kursi before going to bed, right? That's important. Reciting Surah Al-Ikhlas, Surah Al-Falaq, Surah Al-Nas, reciting the last part of Ali Imran, and there's other ayat that he mentions. So this means having a relationship with the Quran and being able to memorize some parts of the Quran, so that you are involved with it in your daily life. So in Ramadan, I encourage that, there's a short syllabus that can be used throughout 1 year, or it could be done intensively during a short period of time. And so then he has certain ayats from Surah Al-Hajj to be reflected upon. He has certain ayats from Surah Al-Baqarah to be reflected upon. And so, for instance, like in Surah Al-Hajj, you have things like, what ibadah is, what striving for the deen is, what's the meaning of being a Muslim, what is the meaning of the pillars of Islam, how it is that we should engage in our ibadah, right? What Tawheed is about, and then in Surah Al-Baqarah, he talks about the importance to reflect on the themes of the blessings of being guided, you know, in Islam as Muslims, and how that plays itself out in the creation and the history. He talks about promises and contracts. He talks about the issue of Iman, the meaning of life, good deeds, and so on and so forth. And he continues, Surah Al-Muzammil, he talks about the issue of Qiyam al-Layl and dhikr, and relying upon Allah. Mostly in Surah Al-Muzammil, most of the things that he outlines as themes to be studied in the different ayat that he encouraged have a lot to do with the heart. They have a lot to do with the heart. And then in Surah Al-Hadid, it talks about Iman, talks about Allah, who He is, the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on and so forth. And I went beyond my time. And so, but I just giving you an idea that at the end of Way to the Quran, there's a syllabus that's set out for studying the Quran in a systematic way to get the themes from certain ayat in certain surah that are designated, so that we can be able to develop ourselves spiritually and have an understanding of who we are, who Allah is, and who our deen is, and even who the Prophet Muhammad is, and what life is about. And with that, we end our study of Way to the Quran, and we ask Allah wa ta'ala to allow us to reach Ramadan and to gain forgiveness in Ramadan for all of our deficiencies. And we ask Allah wa ta'ala to protect all of us and our families in this time of hardship. And we ask Allah wa ta'ala to give us an understanding and a relationship with the Quran. We ask Allah wa ta'ala to facilitate for us all acts of ibadah. And we ask Allah wa ta'ala for the preservation of people's iman, and for Allah wa ta'ala to increase our rizq, especially for Allah wa ta'ala to protect those who are poor. And we ask Allah for our Islamic centers, and we ask Allah wa ta'ala for His support in that regard, in the funding for our Islamic centers that are in need of aid, and our masajid and Islamic Learning Foundation and ICNA. And we ask Allah wa ta'ala for other organizations that are doing good work. And most of all, we ask Allah wa ta'ala to allow us to die in the state of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.